Afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just so that you're aware, there's a difference in how this room was scheduled between the app and the paper brochure that we received in our bags. So this is the Pediatric Power Mobility presentation. If you're here for physics, that would be next door. Okay? So I wanted to thank the International Seating Symposium Conference Committee for having us here today. Also wanted to take a moment to recognize World Down Syndrome Day and let you know that I'm rocking my socks in honor of World Down Syndrome Day. But those of you who know me know that I rock my socks every day. I hope that some of you have joined in the celebration. Today what we're going to be doing is talking about tailoring training needs for children who use power mobility. We do not have any disclosures or conflicts of interest. We would like to thank the families of the children whose pictures and videos that you will be seeing in the presentation. Families have given us their permission to not only show identifiable pictures and videos, but also to talk about their child's condition and testing results, and we really appreciate this. To protect the privacy of the children, please do not, if you should recognize any of the children, please do not betray the confidence that they have placed in us for educational purposes. Our learning objectives today relate to identifying power mobility assessment tools that can be used with different types of power mobility learners, identifying and discussing features of power mobility training methods targeting the different type of power mobility learners, and then discussing appropriate outcomes or expectations of power mobility training for the different types of power mobility learners. When I talk about the benefits of power mobility, typically when I'm doing a presentation like this, I have to sell the audience on that. I'm thinking that I'm preaching to a choir up here, so we're going to just breeze right through this, if I can get it to work. I think there's one in the back. No, okay, good. So you'll recall that Roz Livingstone and Debbie Field did a wonderful systematic review in 2014 looking at the outcomes of power mobility in children. And they found that there were benefits for power mobility use across all levels of the ICF. It's really quite a powerful systematic review. Livingstone and Paleg, also in 2014, felt that through their Delphi process and systematic review, that they were able to identify some practical action points for the introduction of power mobility. And one of the things that they talked about was power mobility is beneficial for many different types of children. Children who will never walk, children who have inefficient mobility, but also children who lack inefficient independent mobility in early childhood. In our power mobility project, we focus a lot on children who learn from their driving, and Livingstone and Paleg acknowledged that this is beneficial even if a child will never learn to use a device independently or in the community. One of the things that I'm trying to do more about as I present is remind us that mobility shouldn't be a one thing or the other. Most of us use already different types of mobility today. We're staying outside of the city, so I took a bus, I walked a little bit to get here, I've taken some escalators today. So I think it's typical as human beings to use different forms of mobility. But sometimes due to funding issues, theoretical issues, families and children often feel like they only have one option. It's either power or no power. And I just wanted to remind us that we can have a child who's working on power mobility options while at the same time working on standing and walking activities. I don't think we need to think of it as an either or, but more as a mobility plan rather than a walking plan or a power plan. When I met Debbie Field and Roz Livingstone about 5 or 6 years ago, they were talking about different types of power mobility learners. And I was like, could you please publish this? Because I need to cite this. And every time I heard them talk, every time we get together, I was like, oh, please, could you publish this? And finally, this fall in October in 2018, Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology published their paper in which they discussed the 3 types of power mobility learners, and they've identified exploratory learners, operational learners, and functional learners. And I couldn't have been more excited to be able to start building on the work that they have done, and we gratefully acknowledge their work to identify these types of learner groups. So according to this work by Field and Livingstone, all young children, or most young children, begin power mobility as what they call an exploratory learner. And they define a learner group by the speed at which a child progresses in their power mobility skills. So it makes sense that most young children who'd never had a chance to move would spend at least a little time in this exploratory learning phase. Exploratory learners typically remain in this learning stage for a prolonged period of time. We have a lot of published research, and we've presented a lot on our drivers who are exploratory learners, and they're learning from their driving, maybe learning cause and effect, exploration, discovery. But it often, this learner group, according to Field and Livingstone, includes children with cognitive limitations or sensory impairments like visual deficits or cortical visual or cerebral visual impairment. And again, these children may remain at this level for protracted periods and may never progress to that next level of power mobility learning group, which is called the operational power mobility learner group. They need an extended time, and operational learners also need an extended time to learn, but it's related to operating the device. They already have that foundational idea of cause and effect. And the expectations for the children's performance, if they're operational power mobility learners, often are influenced by the environment. Functional learners progress quickly through exploratory and operational stages, and they're focused on integrating the use of a power mobility device into daily activities. So they've gotten the idea, okay, I know what to do with this device, I know how to operate it, now I have to integrate it into my daily life. So what I thought we'd do now is kind of look at each of the power mobility learner groups in a little bit more detail, and kind of look at some videos and cases from our program to try to illustrate the different points. So exploratory learners, as I said, have formed the foundation for our Grand Valley Power Mobility Project. In the exploratory learning category, the learner frequently needs a lot of assistance. We sometimes even start with actually placing the child's hand on the switch to help them be able to use and start to understand the idea of movement. They require very close adult supervision 100% of the time. One of the things that my students always want to do, because we have an attendant control that's tethered to our training devices, my students always want to make that Bluetooth, because they want it wireless and cool. But I like the fact that it's tethered, because if my student gets distracted, the tether will come out, the device will stop, and the child will be kept safe. And that's how much supervision the children need at this stage. We have to keep them safe. And we also have to keep others in the environment safe. Oftentimes, according to Field and Livingstone, and for some of the work that we've done, training methods in this group are encouraging self-initiated movement and mobility through engagement in individually motivated activities, and kind of mimicking some of the development of independent mobility skills in typically developing children. So nobody taught you how to crawl, nobody taught you how to walk. You were interested in something in your environment. You wanted to go get the cat, you wanted to go get your toy, you wanted to get your pacifier. And you worked and worked until you could go get that. And so we try to set up some similar things with whatever the child finds motivating. The training environment for this group is often quite controlled, although I have a caveat here that I have had a couple of children in this group who liked an exciting environment. They wanted lots of people cheering for them and lots of people yelling and hollering. Personally, that's not my favorite learning style, and many of our children don't like that. They get overwhelmed, but we've had a couple of children who wouldn't do anything until the fan club had arrived and was cheering them on. We had one young lady who was 18 when she started with us, and she'd never moved and didn't have any way to say yes or no or anything. And boy, did she find it motivating to interact with my male physical therapy students. So again, finding what's motivating and appropriate. Okay. And again, that idea of familiar environments is often important. So when we work in our program, we primarily work in a university setting, which is obviously not a natural setting. So we try to work in the same space. We do a lot of work in our hallways, and we come into the same hallway areas. We have a big sunroom that the children sometimes like, and we again try to follow that path frequently. And when the child starts to get bored, and you can tell when they start to get bored of doing the same things, they're ready to move on to different things, which is wonderful to see. Some of the time when we look at exploratory learners, Field and Livingstone suggests that different power mobility devices might be used. They're suggesting shared or loaner equipment, battery-operated toy cars, operated with a single switch, or in our case, the alternate power mobility device, our power wheelchair trainer, and our play and mobility device that you'll see in our videos today. Assessment tools are going to be aligned with whatever our goals are. One of the things that I think that we often look for as clinicians is a one-size-fits-all assessment tool. And in the case of power mobility, I think that that's challenging, because in this learner group, what we're looking at is really dependent on the goals. For example, if we have a child who's using very young child who's using a ride-on toy car, their goals may be relating to enhancing their development through early mobility experiences. And so we might choose something like the Battelle that's been used like by Jones et al. In her work, or even some of the other types of tools in that region. If our goals relate to exploration, maybe we use something like the COPM to track the progress. And sometimes power mobility skills are the goal, the outcome, maybe basic beginning skills, but you want to make sure that you're focusing on the skills that are appropriate for the child. For example, the wheelchair skills test powered version is a wonderful tool, but for this population, not very many of the items may apply. So that would be such a floor effect that it would be difficult to show progress using that type of tool. So if we're using goals related to development, again, sometimes, like we're doing a project with what we call an early intervention program, or early on, our Birth to 3 program in Michigan. And so we've aligned some of our outcome tools to be related to their developmental tools. That was a pretty easy idea for me to get behind. And then again, different goals related to power mobility skills could be things like the WSC, the Wheelchair Skills Checklist, developed by Charlene Butler, or it could be something even a little different than that. We're going to discuss a couple of different tools there. Our expectations need to be in line with what the child is going to be doing. This morning, I was in a session with Emma Smith, and Emma mentioned that the first time somebody drives a vehicle, like the first time when you drove, were you a competent driver? Did your mother run and hide? You know, so expecting that the children who've never moved, never been in a power device, are going to suddenly just up and drive and do everything all at once may not be an appropriate expectation. Oftentimes when I present, people are like, well, if the child's not going to be able to have their own power mobility device, why are we even doing this? And I try to help them to see that power mobility is more than a way to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of learning, a lot of decisions that can be made, a lot of opportunities to learn cause and effect. So it's really okay if these learners never progress beyond being exploratory learners. A lot of previous work in this area has been done, some of it by us, some of it by others, Lisbeth Nilsson and others. But that idea of the impact of power mobility on cognition and cognitive skills, social skills, problem solving, and some of our work relates to mastery motivation, that idea of persistence in something that is difficult, a task that is difficult. Power mobility training can also be used as an intervention. One of the things I wanted to do today is, because so many exploratory learners have been the focus and the emphasis of our presentations, I wanted to look at a little bit of a different style of exploratory learner. So we may have some children, and we have had a number through our program, who are using power mobility for an intervention, even though power mobility use is not the expected outcome. In such instances, the child can gain benefits from exploring the use of power mobility, even though the goals of power mobility use do not actually relate to long-term use. Elizabeth Nilsson and Josephine Durkin, in their follow-up paper to the ALP, talk about this concept quite a bit. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of kids. This child is affectionately known as exploratory learner number 1 here, but this child is using power mobility as an intervention. So when this young man came to us, he was 4 years and 2 months of age, had a triplegic cerebral palsy. He was at a GMSCF level 4, but he also had an autism spectrum disorder. When I did my initial kind of quote-unquote MAT eval, mine's on the floor, I found that he had really good posture control. He could sit really well. He didn't like putting weight on his feet. He had a lot of sensory issues, but I really couldn't find any great reason why he was not interested at all in moving. He should have been able to be engaged in some sort of mobility through my physical therapy eyes. One of the things that Mom mentioned was that she would take the child, they'd come into the house, she would put the child down, she'd go about the house, do her chores, cook dinner, she'd come back and the child would still be in the same spot. And to her, she wanted the child to be more mobile. She also noted that he did not have any cause and effect skills, or very limited cause and effect skills, and she wanted him to start interacting with the environment. Some of the tests and measures that we decided to use related to the assessment of learning power mobility use. For those of you who are not familiar with the ALP, we use the ALP a lot with all of the learner groups because it really spans the spectrum of the learner groups. We use the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure to focus in on some occupational performance problems that the mother identified, and we'll look at those later. And we also used a maternal interview. We often use a maternal interview pre and post to look at the parents' response, or parents' perceptions rather, of their child's response to power mobility training. We provided him with power mobility training for just 45 to 60 minutes a week for 16 weeks. We trialed him in our power wheelchair trainers, you're going to see here in a minute. We actually ended up having him train in our small play and mobility device. And as with many of our children, I started him with a single switch. I find that's more successful. So you can see here we're in our power wheelchair trainer. He's in his adaptive stroller. We can use tie downs, so the adaptive wheelchair, his adaptive stroller is tied down just like it would be on a bus or in a van, and we're just helping him to get used to the switch. And at this point, he had, again, very limited understanding. He appeared to enjoy the movement, but sometimes he'd get upset when it would stop spinning, and he really didn't have the concept yet that he was in control of the spinning. So we emphasize the development of cause and effect skills, and harking back to some of Elizabeth Nilsson and Josephine Durkin's work, but more Elizabeth Nilsson's, we also focused on tool use, that idea of the child using the tool for a purpose. We used purposeful movement and play, and we also provided some environmental exploration. So here he is, a little down into the training, and we've introduced him to 2 switches. And he is going straight forward, and the a psychology student working with him helps him to realize that there's a second switch there that does something different. And he gets to spin for a second because he really loves spinning. And you can see that she was going to ask him to stop, and he stopped on his own and went to the other switch because he wanted to go forward, I think, at that point. When we looked at the idea of interacting on the environment, he was really used to his environment coming to him. He'd never actually moved to anything. Remember, Mom used to come in and put him on the floor, and he would stay there in the house until she moved him. So we found that he was enjoying his Z-Vibe, so the Z-Vibe became very helpful, and he wants us to bring it towards him, and he's reaching for it and reaching for it. And this child is nonverbal, but he's trying to move, and he decides he doesn't want the Z-Vibe, he wants his mom, and he said mom for the first time. And comes in and gets a hug from mom, which was so special. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit that. But it was just so heartwarming to see a child who's never really interacted on his environment and never said mom, say mom. In our training with him, he progressed from an ALP phase 1, novice with limited understanding of cause and effect, to that phase 5, kind of a sophisticated beginner with conscious cause and effect skills. On the COPM, an increase of 2 or more points in either performance or satisfaction is considered to be clinically significant, and you can see he was clinically significant in all of his activities. The caregiver interview showed a lot of the mother's perception of improved, the child's improved understanding of mobility. She described a time when she came into the house, set him down, just as usual, went into the kitchen, started fixing dinner, came back through, and the child was gone. Scared her to death. She's like, oh my gosh, and she's running all over the house. He had crawled 3 rooms away and was now exploring the house. And she had mixed emotions about this because it was really easy to leave him there, right? But it was really exciting. During the time period, the child had tried to use a walker a number of times, but had never been successful. And he started using the walker. And one of the things that I learned really early in my career is you can't use a walker if you don't know how to use a tool. And so I think that maybe some of that idea of tool use in the ALP was kind of helping him there. In the months that followed, and I'm talking months, this child emerged with independent ambulation in all environments and started running. Our goal wasn't to make him a power wheelchair user. Our goal was to help him to understand cause and effect. And a side effect was that he got to understand movement. And he is quite a handful today, according to his mom. Our other exploratory learner who was using power mobility as an intervention was a 3-year, 21-month-old boy who was 15 months post-acquired brain injury. Prior to the brain injury, he evidently had some speech issues, but otherwise was typically developing. He was able to sit and crawl at the onset of our intervention, but it was very limited crawling. It was more like a transition and a hop and back down. He was unable, again, to use a walker, was not interested in a walker. The family's desired outcomes were increasing interactions with other people, because he had evidently been an outgoing child, and so they really wanted him to get back into that. And exploring the environment, because they felt that it would be helpful for him in his rehabilitative process. Again, we used the ALP, we used the Pediatric, because we were looking at some functional skill improvements. We used the wheelchair skills list, the COPM, and again, a caregiver interview. He also had power mobility training weekly for 12 weeks. He used our power wheelchair trainer. I tend to start the kids with 1 switch because I think that's more successful and I can easily move them up. So I started him with 1 switch, but he ended up quickly within the first session progressing to 3. And then he went to a joystick. So you can see here, this is an early session. My co-presenter, John, who's down in the front row there, was working with him. I'm talking to the DAG and taking the camera. But he has discovered that he can move. And boy, is he excited. Look at that smile. Just love watching this video. And he hits the wall. And he did this quite a few times. And if I had the volume up, Dad is saying to me, he shouldn't be hitting your walls. And I'm saying, they're not my walls, they're my Dean's. So it was just a really nice thing to see him. Mom and Dad talked about how nice it was to see him smile, because that wasn't something they were seeing him do a lot of since the accident. So we progressed him pretty quickly to a joystick. And so here he is using a joystick for the first time, and you can see he gets kind of serious about it. And that again is reflected on the ELP. As the child is concentrating, they're very serious. So sometimes people mistake this for the child being unhappy, but later on in that same session, might even be in this video, you see him start to smile. So I think that just a caution to be, not be concerned if the child is perhaps having a look of concentration on their face. We encourage problem solving in his sessions, so decision making, you're coming to the end of a hallway, do you want to go this way and get this toy, do you want to go this way and get that toy? He really enjoyed things like the artificial trees in the, you know, those artificial tree plant things that you have at universities. He liked to go up there and pick the leaves off of the artificial trees and watch them draw up. He loved our whiteboards. We have whiteboards all over our building, and he wanted to go and draw on those. So there were all sorts of things for him to do, and he had lots of opportunities to hone his attention and spatial awareness skills. He went from a phase 4 advanced beginner to a phase 7 on the ELP. He had clinically significant improvements in daily activities on the Pediatric, and he was able to perform all 7 skills on the wheelchair skills checklist at the end. At the COPM, again, he was able to achieve clinical significance for performance and satisfaction for all of his identified occupational performance issues. The caregiver interview was where we saw the greatest changes. Previously, the caregiver had expressed that the child had a lot of outbursts and tantrums. She did not mention those at all in the unprompted interview. When prompted, she said, oh, he's not having very many of those. She described him as happy, whereas initially she had described him as very frustrated and sad. He was saying more words and putting words together. He also had started to use a walker, and he was propelling and maneuvering his manual wheelchair. In the months that followed, he too started independently ambulating and even started running. It took him a few months longer. I think he was about 9 months, where the other child was within 3 months. So again, just another demonstration of how we can use power mobility as an intervention, even when it's not the goal to have power mobility use. One of the things that I wanted to mention as an assessment tool, because we're beginning to look at this assessment tool ourselves, is the idea of using the power mobility training tool. Now, we developed the power mobility training tool specifically for the idea of guiding the development of power mobility training for this population or for the exploratory learner. And we did not consider it to be an outcome measure, but some recent work by Roz Livingstone and Debbie Fields suggests that it might be appropriate. So in our current study, we are using it as an outcome measure for the first time. We provide this free of charge, so my email address will be at the end of the presentation if you would like to have our score sheet and manual. Moving on to operational learners. Now, these children also are going to need close adult supervision and intermittent assistance, but not at the same level as the child who is an exploratory learner, but always for safety. And I always encourage that idea of age-appropriate supervision. Would you let the 2-year-old wander the grocery store by themselves? No. So we wouldn't let a child in a power mobility device who is 2 years old wander the grocery store either. We use a lot of play activities with our operational learners. Some of the games we play relate, of course, to what the child likes. We've been known to play a lot of cops and robbers. I get arrested all the time. One of our little guys liked wrestling, so he would knock over bolsters with wrestlers' faces on it and be the king of the wrestling world. We provide lots of practice opportunities. We typically use a controlled setting, only 1 or 2 environments, because again, these children are trying to operationalize the use of the power wheelchair, so we want them to be successful and not overwhelmed. We use our alternative power mobility devices, primarily our power wheelchair trainer and our play mobility device. But again, Livingstone and Fields say you can use a shared or loaner equipment, or again, the battery operated ride-on toys if the child is at that level of being able to use more than one switch. Assessment tools, again, depend on goals. I'll go over a few of those. But expectations often are related to the child progressing towards being a functional power wheelchair user and perhaps being able to move forward their skills in power mobility. So oftentimes we find in our program that our children who are using alternative forms of access, a head array, an alternative joystick, or alternative switch placement will fall into this learner group. Some of these children progress to becoming independent community power wheelchair users. Some don't, and that's okay. We've had a lot of success with children moving from this group into being able to have their own individually prescribed power wheelchair, but that might not be the goal for every family, and that might not be the goal for every child. A lot of non-child related factors will come into play. Some of the non-child related factors that might come into play that you can read about in some of the literature relate to the idea that some children will gain their power mobility skills quite quickly in this group, maybe not as fast as the functional learners, but over a relatively short period of time considering the child's life. And when you look at typical development, the parent has a gradual increase in the child's independence, right? And the parent has some time to get used to things. And the parent has some time to, ooh, I better put the outlet covers on. Ooh, I better change this. I better make these modifications to the environment to keep my child safe. Well, when a child brings a power mobility device into the home, that all changes like a flash of light. And some of my parents talk about that as an explosion in their lives, a good explosion and a bad explosion, because there's so much that they weren't prepared for because their child now has this newfound freedom. So with the case that we're going to talk about, some non-child related factors came into play as well. So just wanted to introduce you to one of our operational learners. He used an alternative access method, a tongue access device that was developed by our engineering students and faculty. So this young man has spastic athertoid CP, or dyskinesia, as it's known in Europe. Very involved young man, GMFCS level 5, max level 5. Very good verbal skills, a little breathy, which gave him the CFCS level 3. Sometimes his volume was very poor. He had a lot of volume control issues. So it was often difficult to hear him because his voice was so low. His eating and drinking skills were phenomenal and really started us down the road of heading towards the tongue device. He came to us when he was 7 years old, and it took us quite a while to work out his access issues. And a lot of that had to do with we were working at the pace of student groups and courses, so we had to work at the pace of the students' coursework. But when we were finally able to find something that worked for him, we started doing some ongoing training. Again, we use the ELP, we use the WSC, and the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. We find that these are kind of our go-to types of tools. We developed this Bite-Splint device. We were able to work with a local dentist and an orthodontist to create a mold and then a Bite-Splint that had a little bit more of an extension into the palate. I never knew how small a child's palate was until I tried to put switches into this small palate area. But we were able to get 3 switches. We'd hoped to get 4 and a Bluetooth chip, but we were not able to. But this device went into his mouth and he could press it, the switches with his tongue. Trying to get it to move. There we go. Again, we provided him training just once a week. Many times we're limited in the training we can provide by the family's schedule. This family, mom was expecting another child, couldn't lift this child, so they were limited by dad's work schedule, and dad could come Friday night at 7. My students were thrilled. But again, we used the power wheelchair trainer. We did a lot of play activities. He was the one that liked to arrest me quite frequently and put me into jail for all sorts of cops and robber activities. One of our students, her brother is a Michigan State Trooper, and he gave us some paraphernalia, you know, the kids' stickers and stuff that they give out. So he also was a superhero. He had a cape and everything, went flying through the building to save humanity. And he really enjoyed these play activities. One thing that his initial session, it's hard to, if you try to sustain your tongue against the roof of your mouth and think about having to use that to drive, that was challenging for him. But, and he was like, this is too hard, I'm not gonna be able to do it. And I said, give me 12 weeks. It's called a power wheelchair trainer, not a power wheelchair get it and endure. And he graciously gave us that time, and within the, just a few sessions, he had improved so much. As one of our favorite videos here. So he's driving along here and he's gotten himself kind of stuck on the edge of the wall. He gets himself off and continues to drive forward. Just an incredible opportunity for us. Seating is a big issue for him. We were not in charge of his seating, but seating is a big issue for somebody like this young man who has a lot of tone and has not responded to any of the spasticity management or dystonia medications. At the end of our session, our training session, he was involved in Miracle League baseball in our community, and he wanted to run the bases himself. So we took our trainer on a very, very cold day at the end of April. We're all very cold here, and was driving down to first base. Not everybody understood, but he was the one driving himself. His dad is with him there. His dad is his buddy in the Miracle League activities. But that was a really big highlight for him, and I have to say a great highlight for us in our program. He moved from the ELP phase 4 to a phase 7. He was able to perform 6 of 7 skills. Remember, we weren't able to give him 4 switches, so he did not have a reverse option. So he was able to perform all the skills that he had the access to. He was able to drive forward down hallways, right and left turns. Spinning was something that at first he didn't like, that he felt a little out of control, but he got to like it. He would stop in response to environmental cues. He's probably the safest driver I've ever met. He would tell people, oh, you're too close to my chair, you'll need to move, I might hit you. And he's just a very considerate child in those ways. He could go through very narrow spaces and doorways. There was some paths leading through, like some linoleum paths through carpet in our campus. And he was able to weave through those and go through what he would refer to as mazes that the girls had put up, obstacle courses. So his maneuvering was improving, and he could approach furniture without running into it. In fact, many times he was able to drive better than some of my students who might be trying to put the trainer away empty at the end of the night. On the COPM, he improved and clinically significantly in performance for all of the identified occupational performance issues and in 2 of the areas of satisfaction. We were very excited about his use. He was very excited about his use. And we really felt that he might be ready to move on to an individually prescribed power wheelchair. However, some non-child related factors came in. His parents had recently bought their first home, and it was nowhere near accessible. And they didn't feel that he would be able to safely use a power wheelchair within their home. They also didn't have a way to transport it, and that was very concerning to them. And they had a brand new baby, and were concerned that the baby was beginning to crawl, and would the baby be safe if his brother was driving a chair and couldn't see him. So they went into a waiting mode and to see what would happen. They were not expecting, I don't think, that he was going to do so well. I think they were expecting that he was going to, trial an access device and yet again have issues with it. So they were just not, I don't think, ready. And so we did not push this in any way. And when they're ready, we figure they'll initiate that. But again, I think that we heard some of the things at the plenary this morning and yesterday about the need to listen to our children and our families. Although it might have been this child's goal to drive, and I really think it wasn't his parents yet. And that was something they needed to work out as a family without any interference from us. And functional learners, being that top of the learning group, power mobility learning group issues, the child still needs age-appropriate supervision. And oftentimes, depending on the child's abilities, confidence, and as well as the environment, we may be beginning to stand back a little bit from the child. When I work in the school systems and I have a child who has an aid and has a power device, I try to work with the aid to make sure that the child is having some modicum of independence, even if the aid is just slightly behind and to the side, to give the child some independence. I really want to have the child experience their social world as much as possible. And while it might be typical for 5-year-olds to have adults with them at all times, my power wheelchair users in high school really don't want to have that adult near them because it's really cramping their style. So it really depends on a lot of things. Confidence is something that I find is a big issue. I know Dr. Rushton is in the audience, and she has done a lot of work on wheelchair confidence skills, and the idea that if we're not confident in our wheelchair skills, we're not going to be able to fully participate and optimally use the device. So oftentimes with a child who's a functional learner, I feel almost what I'm doing as much as working on their skills is working on their confidence. So we're refining power mobility skills, integrating power mobility into daily life experiences, and progressively getting into more complex situations and environment as the child is able. We also are using more open, unpredictable environments as the child gets capable. But again, when I try to really monitor the child, because frustration and a sense of failure can be devastating to the child's confidence. So we try to walk that fine line. Jane Ayers talks about in sensory integration that just right challenge. And I believe that so many times as a therapist, I come back to what's the just right challenge for this child. Again, you could use some loaner equipment, but a lot of times, according to Field and Livingstone, children in this group may quote-unquote qualify for an individually prescribed power wheelchair. Oftentimes, the goal for these children is to qualify for that. Again, I'm using qualify in quotes. But confidence may also be a goal, as we just talked about. Improving the functional use of power mobility in daily life involves not just the child, but the family. So helping the family to integrate the power device into their life. How can they get their child to use it in a functional way? I have a lot of parents when they have a child who gets a power wheelchair, they want the power wheelchair to stay outside, because they don't want dirt tracking in and they don't want mud tracking in and stuff, and I certainly can understand that, although I get a lot of mud and dirt in my house and I don't have a power wheelchair coming in. I find that oftentimes it's the child that convinces the parent to let the wheelchair come into the house. And I think that's such a great thing to see the child learn to advocate for themselves. And again, we try not to interfere with that parent-child relationship. All we can do is provide advice. One of the things that research shows is that even though a child might be using a power mobility device at a higher level, they still may benefit from check-ins and additional training. And some qualitative work that we did recently really suggests that learning to use a power mobility device, a power wheelchair, may be an ongoing process. And as a child moves into different situations, different environments, that the child may need to have additional training, even if it's just a short burst of training. Expectations in here are often that the child will move quickly and progress. But again, it really depends on if the child is a young child that's moving all the way through from an exploratory learner through the operational phase and into the functional learner stage. So I thought I would show you a short case here about one of our children who went from that young exploratory learner stage through the operational phase to qualifying for a power wheelchair in a pretty short span of time, actually. So this young lady has spinal muscular atrophy type 1. She's considered a strong type 1 or a weak type 2. Her mom says, I'd never had heard those terms before, but I guess it has something to do with the new genotyping. I wasn't able to find anything else in the literature at the time about it. She started with us at 11 months and used a single switch. She used our play and mobility device, which you see there. We ended up, although we started her with a single switch, we had to build a custom designed joystick. Very easy, didn't take a lot of power because she didn't have a lot of strength. And because of concerns about her health and being out in clinics during the Michigan cold and flu season, the family wanted to use the power mobility device at home. And they had an unfinished basement where they did a lot of the work with the child. And she was able to play with her brother and limited peers that came into the home, mostly cousins. But it was great how they worked out play. Brother was really into hockey. He was 3, and he had a hockey area down there, and he would play. And then she was the Zamboni that came in and cleared the ice. So really nice way to see the children interact. Here she is at our first session in our early version of our power mobility device. So you can see that we have a car seat that has 3 different degrees of tilt. We had to have it fully back for her because she had no head control whatsoever. She has got a pacifier in her mouth and at times actually ended up doing some passy-assisted driving. But she was very excited about being in this device, but was a little unsure of different people in the room. She'd had a lot of medical tests and procedures at that time, and Mom said, oh, well, she's pretty scared of men. And so my research partner, John Ferris, in the front row here, and my male PT student just sat back a little bit so that she could feel more secure. But somehow she knew that John, the engineer, was the one in charge of this device because we had ended the session and I'd taken the switch away, and Mom and I were talking, and the little girl was just sitting in there, and the little girl starts to make eyes at John like, you know, I want to drive, I want to drive. And it was just so wonderful to see her interact, and of course, John melted and the child got to drive more. So we had some students design and build this device for her. It took a few months, so she is over a year here. She's probably about 15 months old here. And this is our first session in the home, and she's Zamboni in there. And again, this was just a very simple practice opportunity for her. But the family kept the device in their home and used it fairly regularly. As I mentioned, they were trying not to go outside very much into the community areas because of the cold and flu season, so this was a great way for them to be able to spend some time. And she ended up very quickly moving into a functional power mobility learner stage, and at under 20 months of age actually quote unquote qualified for a power wheelchair. She was at our local seating and mobility clinic and had the opportunity to trial a power chair kind of unexpectedly and did a really great job. And I'll never forget the joy in the voice of the mom as she called me on her car, on her Bluetooth as she was driving back from this appointment, and just that joy that she had. And the child ended up being able to borrow a loaner device from one of our vendors until her own device came in. And it was just so great to be able to see all that she could do. She was able to play inside. She's able to be the goalie out there in the, if you can get it by the power wheelchair, you can count it as a score. And Of course, you know, there's so many other factors that come into play here, but it was just such a wonderful idea. And the trick-or-treating photos were just beautiful. I wish I had been able to get in touch with Mom to show you those. Just coming down to a quick summary here, I have to put on my old lady glasses here to check our time. Oh, we're doing okay. But just kind of a quick summary, coming back to our learning objectives here. I just wanted to provide a table here of some of the select outcome assessments. Now, these are not an exhaustive list, but I've tried to put the different types of learner groups here and the ones that we commonly use. I really like the PDCAP for looking at functional and oftentimes, you know, that kind of global effect of the power mobility intervention. Years ago, I think it was one of the first times I had presented power mobility at the American Physical Therapy Association's Combined Sections meeting. Suzanne Campbell of Suzanne Campbell Physical Therapy for Children fame said to me, why don't you try using the COPM? And I was like, oh man, that's a great idea. Just had not really thought about it. But we also have the WHOM-IP that was developed by Debbie Field, and that is a wheelchair outcome measure for young people. And it's kind of similar in its structure. The parent or the child identifies participation goals or objectives in different settings, home, community, et cetera, and then rates them on in a similar manner. I think the scale is a little different. I find that that's best for my functional power mobility learners because oftentimes my operational and exploratory learners aren't quite at that level of using the device for participation yet. So I find that the WHOM-IP is often best for my functional learners. Some other assessments for functional learners, the Pediatric mobility, the Power Mobility Program developed by Jan Furamosu, the Wheelchair Skills Test for power wheelchairs, and Dr. Rushton is evidently working on a wheelchair use confidence scale or a WheelCon child for power mobility users. And I think that's going to be an exciting tool to add to our bag of tricks here. I've kind of put down some of the learning methods or kind of where we focus things for our different groups of learners here, just again to help us conceptualize some of the differences. The play is at a very different level usually with our exploratory learners than it is with our operational learners. Now occasionally for some of our exploratory learners who are very bright but just having to kind of figure out general access issues and maybe they're not able to show us their intelligence until we figure that out, then they oftentimes very quickly move and their play goes up. But I find the environmental setup is important for all types of learners. Some of the training methods, again, for the functional learners might include, again, the PMP, and just participation in daily life activities, which is sometimes challenging to get a family and a child to change that paradigm of the child can actually go and do something rather than having to be carried or pushed. Outcome expectations were another one of our learning objectives, so I just wanted to come back to those. And I want to reiterate that, as we've heard in many of our sessions here this week at ISS, almost anybody can at least try power mobility. We don't have any expectations for cognition, age, anything. All of our kids are cute, but I think that's just a happenstance. It's not on the application or anything. But the idea that our expectations need to be appropriately aligned for each learner group. Because if you've had an exploratory learner who you think is going to be able to integrate the power wheelchair into functional daily life, I think everybody will be disappointed. So I think it's important to be able to look at these learner groups, and I'm so grateful for Debbie and Roz giving us these learner groups. just to reiterate that learning to use the power mobility device is an ongoing process. So even when a child's at that functional stage, they may not be able to just be on their own and do anything. In our qualitative study, it was very interesting. Parents talked about how they would think that their child had conquered all of the challenges in their environment, and then they'd go someplace new, a new school, a new school bus with a different style of lift that they had to learn to get on. Going through and changing classes at school was a big one because of all the children in the hallways at once. And again, I just want to call out Debbie Field and Roz Livingstone and really gratefully acknowledge the fact that they've given us these 3 power mobility learner groups. I couldn't be happier about that fact and just want to call them out. Here's some of our references and our CEU code. And there's my email address and one of our cute drivers. And just wanted to see, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Again, my old lady glasses might need to come on. Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. I've been asked to have you use the mic since we are going to be, or I guess this is being recorded rather. And if you have questions for my engineer, he is right here too. Does anybody have any questions? I can't see you guys, remember, so. Anybody? Oh, come on. I was told to leave time for questions. Okay, great, thanks. I can't even see you. Thanks, I appreciate it.
My question is about your PMMT. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, look at that, running up to the mic.
So for your, so you said that you're thinking about using your PMMT as an assessment tool, and I really like that idea as an outcome measure. But then when you showed your chart, you only had it with your exploratory.
Yeah, because it only covers. It was meant to. We developed the PMTT. Specifically to address exploratory power mobility learners, although we're not using the term at the time because Debbie and Roz had not published their work. But we were looking at children in that I'm driving for learning, Elizabeth Nielsen's driving to learn type of idea. So our idea was to help to guide the training activities, and we were not using it as an outcome measure ourselves. But Debbie and Ross had done some work and thought that it might be appropriate to use it as an outcome measure for this younger group of children and children who are in that more exploratory phase, even though they are older. So it's a very basic power mobility skills. It has cognitive and non-cognitive items because how I approach learning is very different if I don't think the child understands how to use cause and effect versus if I think the child knows how to use cause and effect, is just having trouble with access.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make any sense?
Yep.
Anybody else? Oh, thank you.
Hi, Lisa. I have a question about the use of the ALP.
Yes, ma'am.
You may realize, I'm guessing you know that there's been no reliability testing on it, and I wondered if you've, just your sense about using it within your setting.
We use it by consensus, which is pretty nice because after we work with a child to assess, we'll reach consensus as a group, and I think that that's worked really well for us so that we don't have just one person trying to influence it. But I'm hopeful. I know that there's some work being done in Israel on some of the tools to validate some of these tools as well as to assess their reliability. And so I'm really hopeful that that work is going to come forward soon because we submitted a grant application and used the ALP, and I was hesitant because it doesn't have any reliability and validity, and it would be really a great thing. Elizabeth and Josephine have given us such a wonderful tool, and I think it would be used even more if it was validated and reliable.
We have had a really hard time using it when we're not using Joystick. And
and you see, I do almost always switch. It's rare for us to use Joystick, and so we've actually had more experience with it with switches than Joystick, which is interesting.
Great. Maybe you can share the people in Israel who are working on it?
I believe Naomi Geffen is looking at some of the tools, and I'm not 100% sure if the ALPA's in there, but I know she has plans to start looking in that direction.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, shall we call it a day? All right, well, thank you very much.